Luke Pollard.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend for Edinburgh South for securing this debate? It is a very timely debate, especially given the very important anniversaries that we have in celebrating and commemorating women's role in our history. The contribution of women during the First World War is something that has long been overlooked. As we commemorate the centenary of these events, it's important this topic, I think, receives the proper respect and recognition it deserves, because for far too long, the role of women in history in general, but in particular in conflict, has been airbrushed out largely by men. And it's important that we recognise that. As the European continent and much of the world descended into war, many of our brave soldiers and sailors, and Plymouth lads in particular, responded to the call and were sent overseas to the trenches or to serve their country in the Royal Navy. Their bravery was not alone, as it was many of the women of Plymouth who were back home valiantly stepping in to fill the roles that had been left vacant, and echoing many of the sentiments that my honourable friend has described, taking part in medical support. As more and more men were sent to the front, women were able to move into the roles which had previously never been available to them. In Plymouth, many of the women in World War I became factory workers, railway guards, postwomen, tram drivers and police officers, which kept Britain and Plymouth going during those dark years. This took place right across the country, and not least in the area that I now represent, with thanks to the support of the superb local historian Chris Robinson, who has written about the role of women in Plymouth in the World Wars. Some of the stories of the sacrifices that women made are able to come to the fore. One key role that women took up in World War I, which provided vital to our war effort, was the work in munitions factories, often dirty and dangerous work. This was where women put their lives at risk, being exposed to poisonous chemicals and accidental explosions. In Plymouth, a technical school was established to train women in this work. Within a year of being established, nearly 400 women had been trained in how to create munitions and were busy working on the production lines in Union Street, Prince Rock and Bull Point in the constituency I now represent. Women carried out this important work, helping the Allies in their endeavours to outgun the Central Powers. The great travesty here is that they were thanked for this service by receiving less than half the wages of men doing similar work. Happy giving way.
Thank you, Honourable Gentleman, for giving way. I'd like to also pay tribute to the women of Glasgow who worked in the munitions factory. At the start of World War I, it was reckoned there was about 15,000 of them working in the factory. By the end of World War I, there was over 65,000 playing a vital role supporting the army as it went forward. So I would just like to place on record my tribute to women of Glasgow.
Thank the honourable lady for that intervention. I think there are many untold stories of women whose contribution to the war effort needs to be told right across our country, including those in Scotland. A further way in which women contributed to the war effort in World War I came in the establishment of the Women's Police Service, which was set up by Margaret Damer Dawson in 1914. Damer Dawson had been working towards establishing a female presence in the police force for a number of years, but the war provided an opportunity for doing so. The WPS was Britain's first uniformed women's police service, and within the first 3 months, there were 50 such recruits in Plymouth. This voluntary service of spirited women paved the way for the first official female police officers a few years later. One of those first to join up in the WPS in Plymouth was Plymouth's very own Nancy Astor, a woman who is celebrating her own anniversary in 2 years' time as the first female Member of Parliament to take her seat, who represented the seat that I now represent now. She opened the door to many women coming forward to stand for election, and her service to our country started in the Women's Police Service in Plymouth. I'd like to pay tribute to those people who have worked so hard over the course of this last year to recognise the role of women to World War I. In particular, I would like to thank all those volunteers and staff from not only Plymouth City Council and Plymouth Museum who have so expertly welcomed and told stories of men and women and the service to our armed forces at the Commonwealth War Graves Poppies Wave on Plymouth Hoe, a fantastic example of how to use the ceramic poppies to create a wave over our war memorial. It has been a truly moving and memorable installation. But that provided opportunity for events and discussions about not only of the names of the people on the war memorial, predominantly men, but also the untold stories of women who contributed. Earlier this year, having just been elected, I tabled a number of parliamentary questions around the role of women in public life, and in particular around the amount of statues that we have towards women. Because as 50% of the population, it should be right that 50% of the stories that are told should be around women. I understand that the Minister's Department doesn't keep central statistics on the number of statues and pieces of public art dedicated to women from history, but perhaps that might be, given the anniversary of women getting the right to vote next year and the 100th anniversary of Nancy Astor's election in 1919, maybe a good place to start, so we can start correcting and telling the story of women's roles in public. When we commemorate the anniversary of the First World War, it's important to remember the services of brave men and women up and down the country who gave their service to our country, not only those who fought on the front and on the seas, but also those who fought on the home front as well. And I hope that this debate not only concludes with the erection of the statue and the memorials that my honourable friends have spoken about, but enables all of us to talk more profoundly and clearly about the role of women in World War I that has been far too overlooked to date. Thank you.